Dear listeners, welcome to History with Herodotus, where we embark on a journey through the annals of time to uncover the hidden threads that weave our world together. Today, we find ourselves standing at the precipice of a pivotal moment in modern history, gazing out upon the tumultuous landscape of the Tiananmen Square Protests. This epochal event, which would shake the foundations of China and resonate across the globe, has its roots in the complex tapestry of Chinese politics, economics, and social change. As we delve into the origins of this pivotal moment, let us transport ourselves to the vibrant city of Beijing, where the imposing silhouette of the Tiananmen Gate stands sentinel over the square. It is here, amidst the bustling streets and ancient architecture, that the whispers of dissent first began to stir. The year was 1978, and China was in the throes of a profound transformation. The death of Mao Zedong 2 years prior had left a power vacuum, and the country was slowly awakening from the rigid orthodoxy of Maoist ideology. The third plenum of the 11th Central Committee, held in December 1978, marked a significant turning point in this transition. It was during this meeting that Deng Xiaoping, a veteran leader who had been purged during the Cultural Revolution, emerged as a key figure in the reform efforts. Deng's vision for China's future, which emphasized economic development and modernization, would have far-reaching consequences for the country. As we navigate the complex landscape of China in the late 1970s, we find ourselves in a world where the memories of the Cultural Revolution still lingered. The streets of Beijing were filled with the sounds of hawkers selling their wares, while the smell of coal smoke and cooking oil hung in the air. It was amidst this backdrop that activists like Wei Jingsheng began to call for democratic reforms and an end to the Communist Party's monopoly on power. The Democracy Wall movement, which emerged in 1978, was one of the earliest manifestations of this desire for reform. It was during this time that dissidents like Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang began to speak out against the excesses of the Mao era and advocate for greater freedom and accountability. The movement's slogan, "Democracy is the fifth modernization," became a rallying cry for those seeking greater freedoms and a more open society. As we explore the historical context of this pivotal moment, we find ourselves in a China that was rapidly changing. The introduction of economic reforms, which began in 1979, would lead to rapid growth and development, but also create new social and economic tensions. The rise of a new middle class, who were increasingly connected to the global economy, would create new demands for greater freedom and autonomy. And so, as we navigate the complex landscape of China in the late 1970s and early 1980s, we begin to see the precursors to the Tiananmen Square protests take shape. The intersection of economic reform, social change, and political activism created a potent mix that would eventually boil over into the protests that would shake the foundations of the Chinese state. As we stand at the threshold of this pivotal moment, we find ourselves in the midst of a China that is both familiar and yet utterly transformed. The stage is set for the dramatic events that were about to unfold in Tiananmen Square. Having traced the precursors and origins of this pivotal moment, we now stand ready to immerse ourselves in the heart of the protests, where the courageous actions of students, workers, and ordinary citizens would challenge the very foundations of the Chinese state, leading to a confrontation that would change China and the world forever. Let us proceed with reverence for the past and a keen eye for the complexities of human history as we navigate the pivotal moments of the Tiananmen Square protests and step into the midst of the tumultuous events that would soon unfold. Dear listeners, welcome back to History with Herodotus, as we continue our journey through the tumultuous landscape of the Tiananmen Square protests. As we immerse ourselves in the heart of the protests, Let us transport ourselves to the spring of 1989, when Beijing was abuzz with excitement and anticipation. The death of Hu Yaobang, a former Communist Party leader who had been sympathetic to reform, sparked an outpouring of grief and anger among students and intellectuals. On April 15, 1989, a small group of mourners gathered in Tiananmen Square to pay their respects to the deceased leader. But as the days passed, their numbers swelled, and their demands for reform and greater freedom began to resonate across the city. The protests quickly gained momentum, with students from nearby universities joining the demonstrations, calling for an end to corruption, greater freedom of speech, and genuine democratic reforms. The iconic image of the goddess of democracy, a 10-meter-tall statue erected in the square, became a powerful symbol of the movement, as protesters chanted slogans and waved banners emblazoned with the words democracy and freedom. As the protests spread, workers, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens from all walks of life joined the demonstrations, united by their desire for change. The movement's leaders, including Wu Kaixi, Chai Ling, and Feng Congde, emerged as charismatic figures, articulating the protesters' demands and negotiating with government officials. The Chinese government, however, was increasingly divided on how to respond to the crisis. Premier Li Peng and other hardliners advocated for a firm crackdown, while reform-minded leaders like Zhao Ziyang pushed for a more conciliatory approach. As the standoff between the government and protesters continued, the world watched in rapt attention, with international media broadcasting images of the protests and the government's heavy-handed response. On May 20, 1989, the Chinese government declared martial law, and troops began to move into Beijing, sparking a series of violent confrontations between soldiers and protesters. The events that unfolded on June 3 and 4, 1989, would become etched in history as one of the most infamous episodes of state violence against civilians in modern times. As we reflect on this pivotal moment, we are reminded of the courage and conviction of the protesters, who risked everything to challenge the status quo and demand a better future for themselves and their country. The Tiananmen Square protests marked a turning point in Chinese history, as the government's response would have far-reaching consequences for the country's development, both domestically and internationally. And so, as we conclude this segment of our journey through the Tiananmen Square protests, we stand at the threshold of a new chapter in this story. Having witnessed the courageous actions of students, workers, and ordinary citizens who challenged the very foundations of the Chinese state, we now prepare to explore the aftermath of the protests and the lasting legacy of this pivotal moment in modern history. Let us proceed with reverence for the past and a keen eye for the complexities of human history as we navigate the tumultuous events that would soon unfold and examine the enduring impact of the Tiananmen Square protests on China and the world. Dear listeners, welcome back to History with Herodotus, as we conclude our journey through the Tiananmen Square protests. The crackdown on June 3 and 4, 1989, marked a turning point in Chinese history, as the government's use of force against civilians resulted in hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths and injuries. The exact number of casualties remains unknown to this day, as the Chinese government has never officially acknowledged the true extent of the violence. The event sent shockwaves around the world, with international condemnation and widespread outrage at the brutality of the Chinese government's response. In the immediate aftermath of the crackdown, the Chinese government launched a nationwide campaign to suppress any remaining dissent and purge the Communist Party of reform-minded leaders. Zhao Ziyang, who had advocated for a more conciliatory approach, was ousted as general secretary and placed under house arrest, where he would remain until his death in 2005. The protest leaders, including Wu Kaixi, Chai Ling, and Feng Congde, were forced to flee China or go into hiding, with many eventually finding asylum in the United States, Taiwan, or other countries. The Chinese government's response to the protests also had significant economic consequences, as foreign investment and trade began to decline in the wake of the crackdown. The United States, European Union, and other countries imposed economic sanctions on China, citing human rights concerns and condemning the government's use of force against civilians. However, these sanctions would eventually be lifted, and China's economy would continue to grow, albeit with a newfound emphasis on stability and control. In the years following the Tiananmen Square protests, the Chinese government has worked tirelessly to erase the event from public memory, censoring any mention of it in state-controlled media and restricting access to information about the protests. However, the legacy of the Tiananmen Square protests continues to inspire democratic movements and human rights activism around the world. The courage and conviction of the protesters have become a powerful symbol of resistance against authoritarianism, reminding us that even in the face of overwhelming oppression, the human spirit can never be fully extinguished. As we reflect on this pivotal moment in modern history, we are reminded of the words of Fang Lizhi, a prominent Chinese astrophysicist and democracy activist, who said, "The Tiananmen Square protests were not just a protest against the government, but a protest for the future of China." The protests marked a turning point in Chinese history, as the country began to grapple with the complexities of modernization, democratization, and human rights. Today, as we look back on the events of June 1989, we are reminded that the struggle for freedom, democracy, and human dignity is ongoing, and that the courage and conviction of the Tiananmen Square protesters will continue to inspire generations to come. And so, dear listeners, our journey through the Tiananmen Square protests comes to a close. We hope that this series has provided you with a deeper understanding of this pivotal moment in modern history and its enduring impact on China and the world. As we conclude this episode, we are reminded of the power of human courage and conviction, and the importance of remembering and learning from the past as we strive to build a better future for all. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history with Herodotus. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.